My name is Nicholas, and I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. The title of what I would like of my message today is, what is God's ROI? And ROI is a term that we use in business called return on investment. I went through LifeLab, as some of you guys know. I went through the process of LifeLab for the first 5 or 6 months of the year. And for me, it was very epic and so transformative. I remember when I started at the beginning and I went through the first 5 sessions, and I realized that in my life, I approached a lot of different process, I would say, or I guess different program that would talk about recovery or sobriety. And I could see a pattern that was happening. And the pattern was that I'm somebody that, can perform. I can check the box. I can get things done. And I would approach, those processes or those program with, okay, I got to get this done, and I got to try to learn and get as much understanding and get as much knowledge as possible, so then I can control my malady, or I can control my drinking or my using. And some of it, worked for a certain period of time, but I now realize after going through LifeLab that I had what I thought was sobriety. I had some short, some medium, and some good period of abstinence, but I never tasted recovery. And by God's grace, as I did the first 5 sessions of LifeLab, I remember one day I was meeting with John and I said, you know what? I want to restart. I want to restart from the beginning. And he's like, what's going on? I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a pattern that has been repeating itself, and I'm coming from it from a head disposition and not from a heart disposition. I believe there's 16 inches between heaven and hell, and it's between my head and my heart. And I knew that if I wanted different results, that I had to go all in from a heart disposition in LifeLab. And we restarted. I restarted from session 1. And I remember when I actually came to session 5 for the second time, and I was looking at my answers from the first 5 sessions, and I was looking at those 35 questions, and I could see the difference. And that process for me brought me to the end of myself, brought me to, I guess for a long time I was approaching it as I got to surrender. And I was very challenged about surrendering is not a choice. Surrendering, if, I've done something wrong and I get stopped by the cops and they ask me to surrender, it's not a choice. I got to surrender. But to abandon myself, that's a choice. I also believe that love only exists if there is a choice. God loves me, and I have the choice to love him back. And the same thing with my recovery. It came to a point that it's not because I'm using and because I'm powerless and I can't stop using. If I just surrender, but it doesn't come from my heart as a choice of abandoning myself and abandoning everything about my life, abandoning how I've done things, and really abandoning to the fact that, God, you got to take it all, all of it, every aspect, every corner of my heart, you got to take it all. So going through that process, again, it was very transformative for me. And coming out, I knew that I had to be very careful about, there's one thing when things go wrong. There's one thing when life is when I'm in pain and I'm actually suffering, and it's kind of a lot easier than to abandon myself. But then when things start picking up and I start getting my energy again, and I started to feel more inflated, and I feel confidence that's coming back, then it's easy to say, God, thank you very much. Praise you. I got this from now on. You can get back to the back seat now. I'm taking the wheel. And every time it brought me Ellen back. Every time. So if there's one thing that came out of LifeLab for me, is the fear. It's the fear of God. And it's this holy fear within me, because when I started LifeLab, I made an agreement with John that I would not be working through the process. I would not be taking any major decision in my life and get involved in any major projects. And that was very challenging, because I realized very quickly how much I can lose myself, or how much I can use what I'm passionate about and work. And for me, it's business development and it's business strategies, and how that would actually give me a high and would help me to subdue my emotion and to just not be and not feel. Another thing also for me was going to the gym and training. Like, I used to train 6 days a week. And then as I started LifeLab, and I started because I came back from a relapse in Nicaragua, and I had a motorcycle accident. So physically I couldn't train at the beginning, but about a month in, I started training again. And then suddenly I got a virus, or they called it long-term COVID. And then for 4 months, I had no energy whatsoever. And I was like, God, what are you doing? Like, this is like crazy. Like, I have no more, in French, c'est des buoys, like buoy, to kind of hold on to. And I was just like, what are you doing? And it's like, yeah, son, this is it. This is you and me. Like, are you ready to do this? Like, I'm just pruning everything out of your life. And you got to sit into this process and into your pain. And are you ready to be all in? Are you ready to abandon yourself to the process? And it's like, yes, from a heart disposition, but also from a head disposition. It's like, I have no choice. There's nothing. I can't work right now. I can't train. Like, there's nothing that I would normally do to try to help alleviate the pain and not having to deal with my emotions. Then I was like face to face, day after day. So this process was amazing. And as I came out of LifeLab, it even took me a few months before starting work again. And I was like this holy fear. I was like, God, I don't care. What is the desires of your heart for my life, for my work life, for my professional life? Because I just had, great stability. I was tasting recovery from the first time. As I went through session 13 and 14, I thought that God removed all of my anxiety. And I thought that anxiety for me started when I started having anxiety attack in 2019. But when anxiety was completely removed, I realized, my God, I've been somebody that has been having this residue of anxiousness my entire life. And I've dealt with anxiousness and anxiety my entire life. And then for the first time, I remember being home, looking at Nancy and saying, my wife, and like, this is crazy. Like, I'm totally at peace. There's no anxiety, there's no anxiousness. And I was like, so like rejoicing, but then also, like fear creeps in and like, is this gonna last? And then, it lasted like a week and 2 weeks and a month and 2 and 3 and 4 months. And then there's one ingredient that kind of came back into the recipe, and it was called work. And suddenly, I truly felt by talking to people that were close to me, that praying about it, I really felt that God was opening that door in regards to this consulting contract. but no matter what, having this kind of ingredient that was now back into the recipe of my life, there's a few things that happened. Me and my wife went to LL ministry, and I thought, like, man, this is going to be so good for Nancy. I just came out of LifeLab. Like, I'm a new man. I'm at peace. I have no more anxiety. Like, this is going to be good for my wife. And man, I got smacked. Like, ooh, I came out of there, and it took me almost a week emotionally just to kind of come back to my senses. And I guess that, God just add other layers, and we went deeper in other areas. But then the following week, kind of this happened, and then work, and then I starting this anxiety coming back. And I shared before that for me, there's the direct interchange between my peace and my anxiety. And when anxiety goes up and peace comes down, there's only one reason. There's only one driver. And that driver is that Nick is trying to play God again. Nick is trying to be the director and control a certain aspect of my life. And right away, anxiety goes up and peace comes down. And sometimes it's consciously, and sometimes it's subconsciously. Sometimes I got to stop and say, God, like, what am I trying to control? And by God's grace, it never takes a long time that he shows me what I'm trying to control in which aspect of my life. And as soon as I come to a point, again, for me, a lot of it was like, I surrender. But a surrender, as John challenged me about, is like, it was not a choice. I got to, if I want to get my peace back, I have to. But now it's now, no, I get to by abandoning myself. And if I truly, from a heart disposition, come to God with truth and with sincere, with my heart being sincere about, God, I just abandon this to you. There's just a miracle that has been happening in my life over and over and over again. And then I taste recovery. And again, like I said, it's so sweet, and I'm tasting divine peace, like total peace. So all of that happened. And then I remember like anxiety starting to creep in after like 4 months. And I was like, I got mad, and I'm like, God, what are you doing? You took this away from me, and now you're giving it back to me. And I remember just Holy Spirit, like just his sweet voice, and it was like, son, I didn't take anything away. You gave it to me. You abandoned it to me. And now you're trying to take it back. And you're trying to control and play God in certain areas of your life, and for me was paralysis by analysis of trying to understand all these emotions and what was happening coming out of, LL, and then work, and certain things was happening with the project. And then normally it's always like, I got to get things done. And I would do everything and force it because I feel that this is the outcome that needs to happen. But now approaching it, and when I'm starting to feel that things are being forced or there's friction, that I got to step back and say, okay, God, I'm going to just abandon this to you right now, because I think that I'm trying to step into this position of playing God and taking your job and trying to direct this. And it's not working. All that to say that I started to do BBA, and in BBA, when I started to do the work in I think the first or second session, that it talks about the circle and the triangle, and it talks about unity and service and recovery. And for me, it was like, wow, like if the unity part and the fellowship part, like I'm part of the upper room. I have also an NA meeting that I'm part of, that I do service. So I'm like, yeah, this unity and this fellowship. I got the meeting on Wednesday morning. I'm like, yeah, that aspect of it, I think that it's good. Then the recovery service, well, I just kind of went through LifeLab, and now we're starting BBA. So I'm like, yes, I'm working on my recovery. And then the service part came. And that's when I had my session with John, and we sat down, and we're starting to have a conversation. It's like, Nick, anxiety came to a point that even you had to go to the hospital. And he's like, normally when that happened, the next step is you relapse. He's like, only by God's grace right now, then, you know, you didn't relapse. It's like, this should be a red flag. Like, this should be a red light, like something happened. And as we're talking, he's like, so, you know, your work, he's like, these guys, you got a consulting contract, and they actually invested in you, right? They're giving you a certain retainer per month, and on the money that you're helping to raise for the project, you're getting a certain percentage, and they also give you some shares in the company. And he's like, so how's the return on investment? Because I started in July, 8 weeks. And I'm like, well, no. He asked the question. He's like, where would be the project if Nick wouldn't be part of that project? I'm like, well, probably would still just be a dream like it used to be for the last 6 months. And he's like, how's the return on investment in the last 8 weeks? I'm like, well, you know, we've been pre-approved with a real estate investment fund for X amount of money, being a large sum. And the project, you know, the projections of the project, we're looking at X amount of net profit by the end of the project. It's like, wow, like 8 weeks, huh? What an amazing return on investment. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. You know, and I was proud of it. I was happy. And then the question came. Well, not the question, the statement, and then the question. And the statement was like, he's like, I know somebody else that actually invested in you. I'm like, really? Ooh. He's like, God. He's like, you're alive, bro. You got vomited back on the shores of Canada. You should be dead so many times, and you are alive. And on top of that, he gave you the gift of, for the first time in like 15 years, or for for your entire life, to taste what sobriety and recovery is all about. Like, he invested a lot. So he's like, let me ask you a question. In the last 8 weeks since the beginning of July, what has been God return on investment? How many souls have you helped out of the pit of hell into a relationship with Jesus Christ? Wow. Like, I was like, wow. And I felt like, like that's the piece that before, a lot of time I would sell myself on the delusion of investing into a for-profit project, thinking that I'm going to be able to take that profit and reinvest it in for purpose, and somehow, somewhere, advancing the kingdom, helping, you know, people that are suffering. But then I would lose myself into that delusion, and I would completely, at a certain point, you know, the for profit and the for purpose, and then I would be in that delusion that it would happen one day, but there would be no balance. And this comes back to BBA and looking at unity and recovery and service. And I think there was like, yes, unity was good. Recovery, I came through LifeLab and I was doing my BBA, but the service part of it was almost non-existing. And there's something special that happened, because as I went after 4 months and started having some anxiety and went through kind of that episode, a friend of mine almost died from he did overdose, and he almost died. And a friend of mine called me and was like, yeah, he's in the hospital. And I called the hospital, and they're like, yes, he can receive some visitors. And I went to visit him. And for the first time, I think that psychiatric hospital, I went there at least 5 times, always as a patient. And for the first time, I was entering it to try to bring a message of hope to someone that was suffering. And there's a miracle that happened. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever been in a psychiatric hospital, but there's like, the doctor has his own like room. And every time that the doctor comes out, there's like, you know, like 5 patients, and they're like, doctor, they want to know, you know, they got to change his med, or when they're going to be able to exit the hospital. And there's always a lot of people around that room. So when I come out of there with my friend, there's like 3 patients, and then they're like, doctor. And I'm like, no, I'm not a doctor. I said, I'm just here to see a friend. And then a friend of mine, one of the person came and shook my hand, and he's like, who are you? I'm like, I'm actually one of you guys. You know, I've been here many times. But I said, by the power of God, man, today, you know, I'm tasting recovery. And I put my hand on his heart, and I was able to pray for him. And tears came down, you know, and I walked out of that hospital and my anxiety was completely gone. By helping the next suffering addict, that gift that has been given me, that investment that God invested in me, and turning around and reinvesting it in somebody else, there's just this miracle that happens. And so having that conversation really woken me up to the point of, in my life, what am I truly doing as service? I think I was selling myself on the fact, oh, I'm like doing coffee at my NA meeting, and when I'm at LifeLab, I'm helping to set up the room sometimes. But truly, like, am I helping another soul to get out of the pit of hell into recovery, into recovering a relationship with God? And by God's grace, I was able to, John asked me to be part and help with LifeLab. And it started yesterday, and I was able to invite a few friends, and just being able to be part of that and to see other people that are in pain, are suffering, and to know deep down that there's hope. There is hope. And hope comes, and there's only one answer. And it's about recovering a deep and intimate union, communion, and relationship with God, with Jesus in the garden of my heart and soul. And if I abandon myself daily, sometimes it's every hour, in front of any situation in my life, and I make the choice to give it to God, He takes it. And He makes ashes out of beauty. He makes beauty out of ashes, or rubies out of ashes. Sometimes I like it's so unreal. I feel like, man, can I climb on top of a mountain and just kind of scream it that there is a solution? And personally, when I speak to people, I say, you know, like, nobody can challenge me on the transformation that is happening for today. And if I believe if I continue to make the choice to abandon myself on a daily basis and continue to grow into unity and recovery and into service, I know that life is life and life's going to happen. But I'm not alone. Like, God, Jesus lives in me. He lives in the garden of my heart. He is the sponsors of sponsors. And I have access 24/7. And anytime that I see this anxiety coming, I can consciously take a step back. And if I can see it, I can abandon it. And if I don't, I can just ask, and He will highlight it to me. It's a miracle. It's a miracle, and man, there's almost no words to explain it, you know. And I was having this conversation with Nancy today and this morning, and we're having our coffee, my wife, and she's like, it's so beautiful to see what God is doing in your heart. And thanks to Vicky and to John, and for you guys being so obedient to the purpose and the call that God had on your life, and just what came out of it, and LifeLab and Josh and the entire team, and everybody that's helping, and everybody that's giving back, and everybody that's in service to help the next suffering addict. Because by God's grace, we have the solution. He gave it to us, and it's real, and it's raw, and it's the truth.